"Your wife is still alive," the black girl said. The words hung in the air, cutting through the drizzle like a knife. Thomas Becket froze. The bustling noise of the memorial garden, the soft murmurs of the guests, everything seemed to stop as if the world itself was holding its breath. Maya Johnson, a girl no older than 25, stood in front of him, her face serious, her eyes unyielding, despite the storm around them. She wasn't shouting, wasn't angry. She simply stated the truth, or at least, the truth as she saw it. The rain continued to fall, but to Thomas, it felt as though the sky had darkened even more. He blinked, trying to process what she had just said. His mind raced. Could it be true? Was this a trick, a sick joke? His wife had been dead for over a year, drowned in a tragic accident off the coast. The authorities had declared it an accident, the body had been found, and the case was closed. So why, in the name of sanity, was Maya Johnson standing here, in front of him, saying those words? The crowd behind him seemed to shift uneasily. They had heard it too, and no one knew what to make of it. Maya stood still, unwavering, as if she had just delivered a simple fact, not a devastating revelation. "What did you say?" Thomas asked, his voice tight, barely above a whisper, struggling to keep his composure. Maya repeated herself, but this time, there was a quiet urgency to her words. "Your wife, Elena, she's still alive. I saw her. She was dragged away. They kept her alive." Thomas's heart slammed against his chest. He wanted to scream, to ask her to stop, but he couldn't. Maya wasn't just talking. She was calm, composed, and every word she spoke pierced through the haze of doubt that clouded his thoughts. His mind flashed to the memories of Elena, her blonde hair, her vibrant smile, the warmth of her presence. The image of her drowning had haunted him every night since the accident. How could Maya know this? How could she say something so impossible? He took a step toward her, his hands shaking. "What do you mean? How do you know this?" Maya didn't flinch. She wasn't scared. "I saw them take her. They took her in a van. I saw it all. She was still breathing, still calling for you. She had a scar across her arm." The words hit him like a wave. A scar? Elena had a scar on her arm. He remembered it well. A long, jagged mark from a childhood accident. It was the one thing she never liked talking about. "How do you know about the scar?" Thomas asked, his voice trembling now, his mind unable to keep up with the flood of emotions. Maya took a step closer. "I saw it. She had a scar. She kept calling for you. She was calling your name, Thomas." The world around him blurred. The sound of the rain, the murmurs of the crowd, everything faded into the background as his mind reeled. His wife alive? It couldn't be. It wasn't possible. But Maya's eyes, so calm, so sure, spoke of a truth that he couldn't ignore. "What do you want from me?" he asked, his voice breaking through the silence between them. Maya looked up at him, her gaze unwavering. "I want you to know the truth. I want you to find her." For a long moment, Thomas just stood there, his mind spinning. He had come here to mourn, to lay his wife to rest. But now, the very foundation of everything he had believed was crumbling. Could it be true? Could Elena still be out there alive? He couldn't answer the question. Not yet. But one thing was certain. Maya wasn't lying. Something inside of him clicked. He had to know. He had to find the truth. His entire world had just shifted. The man who had everything, wealth, power, respect, now felt as though he had nothing. The search for his wife wasn't just a matter of grief anymore. It was a mission, a desperate race against time. And it all started with a simple statement from a black girl he barely knew, standing in the pouring rain. Thomas Becket couldn't move. The words Maya Johnson had spoken echoed in his head, louder now than the soft patter of rain on the memorial garden. He wanted to scream, to ask her how she knew, how she could be so sure. He wanted to run, to escape the heavy weight of her revelation, but something inside him, something that he hadn't felt in over a year, kept him standing there, frozen in place. Maya was still staring at him, calm, her eyes steady, as if she had no doubt that what she was saying was true. His mind raced. He had already lost his wife once, to the storm, to the drowning. Could she truly be alive? Or was this just a cruel trick, some twisted fantasy spun by a stranger who had no place being here? Why would they keep her alive? Thomas managed to ask, his voice hoarse. Maya didn't flinch. She looked up at him with quiet certainty. "I don't know why, but I saw her. She wasn't dead, not then. She was scared, but she was breathing. He couldn't take it anymore. The questions, the doubt, the confusion. He turned and walked away from her, his footsteps heavy on the wet pavement, but Maya's voice followed him. They took her, Thomas. They're hiding her. If you want to know the truth, you have to look. His chest tightened. He knew she wasn't lying. He could feel it in his gut, in the way her words rang true, in the way she wasn't afraid to stand there, facing him, telling him something that had the power to destroy his entire world. He stopped. His hand gripped the railing at the edge of the garden, and he stared out into the distance, as though the answer might appear in the fog that clung to the horizon. How was this possible? How had this happened? He had spent so many sleepless nights thinking about Elena, wondering what she might have endured, and now, Maya's words shattered the delicate pieces of hope he had been clinging to. His wife was alive. The grief had consumed him for so long. He had built walls around his heart, walls that now felt fragile and crumbling. He thought about the life he had without her, empty, hollow. The image of her face had faded, replaced by memories of the hospital, the search, the funeral. But Maya's words, they brought her back to life, just for a moment, and in that moment, everything changed. The billionaire businessman who once controlled everything, who had everything at his fingertips, now felt like a man who had lost everything. His phone rang, but he didn't move. He didn't want to talk to anyone. Not now, not with this new truth hanging over him. His assistant's name flashed on the screen. He swiped the call away, his hand shaking slightly. Maya, he turned to face her again, his eyes searching her face. How do you know all this? What do you want from me? She took a step forward, her expression softening. I don't want anything from you. I'm just telling you what I know. You have to find her, Thomas. You have to find Elena. She's still out there, waiting. Her words were like a spark to dry tinder. He felt the fire of determination start to rise within him. He had been living in the shadow of grief for so long, letting it guide him, shape him. But now he had a new mission, a new purpose. He would find her. He had to. He had to know the truth. The world around him seemed to disappear as he made his way to the car, his mind spinning with new possibilities, new questions, new fears. He had been living in the dark for too long, but now, there was a glimmer of light. Maya had given him something he hadn't dared hope for. A chance to find Elena. A chance to set things right. But first, he had to take that first step. The door to the car slammed shut behind him, and he looked out the window, his eyes filled with determination. He had no idea what was coming, what he would find, but for the first time in over a year, he wasn't alone in his search. The truth was out there, and he would find it. Thomas Beckett sat in the back seat of the car, the city lights flashing past him like distant stars. His mind was a whirlwind of thoughts, and each one pulled him deeper into the mystery that Maya had just opened up for him. Elena, his wife, still alive? It was a question he could not shake. He had lived in the shadows of her death for so long, buried in paperwork, meetings, and obligations. But now, there was a flicker of hope, a dangerous hope that he didn't know how to handle. He needed answers, and more than that, he needed to understand why Maya had chosen him, why she had come forward. The car sped down the empty streets, its headlights slicing through the darkness. The driver kept his eyes on the road, but Thomas couldn't stop looking out the window. The world felt different now, as if he were seeing everything for the first time. He was no longer just a billionaire businessman. He was a man searching for the truth. He had always believed that money could solve anything, that his wealth, his status, could grant him access to the answers he sought. But now, none of that mattered. What mattered was finding Elena, and finding her meant going into places where even his power couldn't reach. He looked down at his phone, the screen blank, as if it held no answers. He had tried calling his assistant several times since leaving the memorial, but there had been no response. The lines of communication felt empty, like they were deliberately cutting him off from everything he thought he knew. Finally, he dialed the number for a private investigator, a man who had helped him in the past when the questions were too complicated for the police. The phone rang once, twice, and then the voice on the other end answered. Beckett. The investigator's voice was rough, like he had just woken up. I need your help, Thomas said, his voice tight. Find out everything you can about Maya Johnson. I don't care what it takes. I need to know what she knows. There was a pause on the other end, and Thomas could hear the investigators breathing slow. Are you sure about this? He asked. This doesn't sound like something that can be solved with a checkbook. I'm sure, Thomas replied, his jaw clenched. She knows something about my wife, and I need to find out what it is. I don't care about the cost. Just get me the information. The investigator agreed, and they ended the call. Thomas leaned back in his seat, staring out the window again. His thoughts were scattered, but one thing was clear. Maya wasn't just some random person who had stumbled into his life. She had information, real, vital information, and he had to find it. The car made its way through the city, turning onto a quieter street, and Thomas felt the weight of the decision he had just made. He was no longer just trying to bury his grief. He was on a mission, and nothing, no one, was going to stop him. He didn't know where this would lead, but he knew one thing for sure. The search for Elena was about to become his obsession. The car came to a stop in front of a small, inconspicuous building. The driver didn't speak, just looked at Thomas in the rearview mirror. "We're here," he said. Thomas nodded, opened the door, and stepped out into the cool night air. The building in front of him looked like any other, dimly lit, tucked away between two larger structures. But he knew this was where his search would begin. He didn't know who Maya was, or why she knew what she knew, but he was going to find out. He had no choice. The door to the building creaked open, and Thomas stepped inside, ready to face whatever came next. Thomas Beckett walked into the small building, his steps echoing in the otherwise silent room. The walls were bare, and the air smelled faintly of dust and old paper. This wasn't the kind of place he was used to. He was accustomed to high-rise offices, boardrooms, and luxury. But this felt different. The investigator, a grizzled man with sharp eyes and a slow drawl, greeted him from behind a cluttered desk. "You must be Beckett. I've got what you asked for," the man said, his voice low and steady. He motioned for Thomas to sit. "I've done some digging. Maya Johnson's been around for a while, but she's not just your average person. She's had ties with some pretty influential people. You're not the first one to ask about her, that's for sure." Thomas took a seat, his mind racing. He had been prepared for something, but not this. "What do you mean, ties with influential people?" Thomas asked, leaning forward, his voice intense. The investigator shrugged, flipping through a stack of papers. "She's got a history. You see, she used to work in a high-end hotel, used to be a housekeeper. But she wasn't just a housekeeper. The kind of people who stayed in that hotel, they knew her well." Thomas's brow furrowed. This was the first he had heard of Maya's connections, and it didn't add up. "Why would she tell me that Elena is alive? What's her angle?" he asked, his voice edged with frustration. The investigator tapped his finger on the table, then slid a photograph across to Thomas. It was a picture of Maya, taken at some event, standing beside a well-dressed man with an expensive watch and an air of authority. "This man is one of the people she's been connected with. His name's Jason Turner. Big-time tech investor, very secretive. If Maya knows him, she's not just some random girl making wild claims. She's got information, something that connects her to high society in ways that you don't understand yet." Thomas studied the photo for a long moment. Jason Turner. The name rang a bell, but he couldn't place it. He slid the photo back to the investigator. "And what about Elena? What do you know about her?" The investigator sighed, pulling another file from his desk. "I don't know much, but I've seen enough to know that Maya's not just talking out of thin air. People like Turner, they don't associate with anyone without a reason. If she's connected to him, she's connected to something much bigger. And Elena, well, that's where things get tricky. There are whispers, Beckett. Whispers about your wife not being dead. Whispers that she might have been taken, kept alive for some reason." Thomas felt a chill run down his spine. His thoughts were spinning now. Maya had said Elena was alive, and now he was hearing the same thing from this investigator. But why? Why would anyone keep Elena alive, and for what purpose? He couldn't process it all, couldn't grasp the full picture, but one thing was clear. The answers weren't going to come easy. "What's the next step?" Thomas asked, his voice determined. The investigator leaned back in his chair, his face thoughtful. "Next, you need to find out who's behind this. Who's really pulling the strings. Maya's just a piece of the puzzle. You've got to dig deeper, Beckett. The truth won't be handed to you." Thomas stood up, his resolve strengthening. He had no choice now. The investigation, the search, it was only just beginning. "I'll find her," he said, his voice low but firm. "I'll find Elena, no matter what it takes." He turned and walked out of the room, the weight of his decision pressing down on him. The path ahead wasn't clear, but he was ready to face whatever came next. He had to. For Elena. For the truth. Thomas Beckett sat at his desk, staring at the stacks of papers that filled the surface. His office, usually pristine and orderly, now felt like a cage. The investigation into Elena's disappearance had consumed him, and despite the wealth of resources at his disposal, he was no closer to finding the answers he so desperately needed. Maya's words echoed in his mind, and he couldn't escape them. She had told him the truth, or at least, she had told him what she believed was the truth. Elena was alive, and now, it was up to him to find her. But how? How did a man like him, a billionaire, someone who controlled so much, go about uncovering a secret this big? He had spent so many years building an empire, solving problems with money and influence. But this was different. Maya had shown him a different path, one that led him away from his comfort zone, away from the world he knew. Thomas leaned back in his chair and sighed. It was clear that the answers wouldn't come from the usual channels. The people he trusted, his team, they were all in the dark, just like him. But Maya, she wasn't just some random person. She knew something. The question was, what did she really know? And why had she come forward now? A knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. His assistant, James, stepped in, looking uneasy. Mr. Beckett, we've received some troubling news. It's about Maya Johnson. There's been a report that she's been seen with Jason Turner, the man you asked about. Thomas's heart skipped a beat. Jason Turner? He had heard the name mentioned by the investigator, but he didn't know much about him. The name was tied to high-end investments and powerful people, but there was little else he could find. What about her and Turner? Thomas asked, standing up. James hesitated for a moment. It's unclear, but there are rumors. Maya and Turner are connected in some way. We think she might be more involved in this than we originally thought. Thomas's mind raced. If Maya was connected to Turner, it meant there was more to this than he had realized. Turner wasn't just any investor. He was a man of immense power, a figure who could pull strings from behind the scenes. And if Maya was working with him, that could mean Elena's disappearance was part of something much bigger than a simple accident. Give me everything you can on Turner. I want to know where he is, what he's doing, and how Maya fits into this. Thomas's voice was calm, but inside, he felt a surge of urgency. This was no longer just a personal quest for his wife. It was becoming a race against time, a battle against forces he couldn't yet see. James nodded and left the room, closing the door behind him. Thomas stood by the window, looking out over the city. The world below seemed so far away, as if it didn't matter anymore. His focus was on Elena and nothing else. But even as he thought about the next steps, a nagging doubt lingered. Maya's involvement with Turner could mean that the truth was more complicated than he had imagined. He had trusted her, but how well did he really know her? How deep did this go? He couldn't afford to make mistakes. The truth was out there, and he would find it. But first, he needed to understand the game he was now playing. And to do that, he needed to get to Turner, to find out who was truly behind all of this. Thomas Beckett sat in his office late into the night, the weight of the situation pressing heavily on him. The usual hum of the city below was drowned out by the rapid clicking of his fingers against the desk. He had spent hours going over the information James had gathered on Jason Turner. The more he learned, the more complicated everything became. Turner was a name whispered in high circles, someone who had access to power, money, and secrets. His company, Turner Investments, had fingers in nearly every pie, from tech to real estate to government contracts. But what did this have to do with Maya? Why was she involved with him? The questions haunted Thomas, swirling in his mind as he stared at the documents spread out before him. He wasn't just chasing a lead anymore. He was chasing a ghost. Maya had told him Elena was alive, but now he was starting to wonder if she was just another piece of the puzzle, or if she had her own agenda. Was she working with Turner to manipulate him? To lead him into a trap? The thought unsettled him. He trusted Maya, or at least, he wanted to. She had been the one to give him hope, to show him a path he hadn't even considered. But what if she was hiding something? The knock at the door broke his thoughts, and James stepped in. I've got something, he said, his voice urgent. Thomas looked up, a sense of dread creeping over him. What is it? He asked, standing up. James held up a thick folder, his expression grim. We've traced Turner's movements. He's been meeting with someone else, someone high up. There's a connection to a private facility just outside the city. I think this is where they're holding Elena. Thomas felt his pulse quicken. A private facility, he repeated, his voice rising. James nodded. It's not a hospital, not a prison, but it's heavily guarded. The type of place you wouldn't expect anyone to come out of, let alone someone like Elena. Thomas's heart raced. This was it. The breakthrough he had been waiting for. The location. He could finally put an end to this nightmare. But there was something else, something Thomas couldn't shake. Who's the other person Turner is meeting with? He asked, narrowing his eyes. James hesitated for a moment before speaking. A man named Gerald Pierce. He's a former military contractor, known for his discreet operations. If he's involved, things are more dangerous than we thought. Gerald Pierce. The name rang a bell. Thomas had heard it in passing, always associated with shady deals, whispered among people in power, but never fully acknowledged. It was the kind of name you didn't want to know, the kind of person who operated in the shadows. And now, it seemed he was connected to Elena's disappearance. Thomas felt a surge of anger rise within him. Pierce and Turner were part of a larger web, one that had kept Elena hidden from him, from the world. But he was done being in the dark. He had no more time to waste. We need to go there, Thomas said, his voice cold with determination. Now. James looked at him, concern flickering in his eyes. Are you sure? This could be dangerous. We don't know what we're walking into. Thomas didn't hesitate. I don't care. We're going. He grabbed his coat and stormed out of the office, his mind fixed on the facility that might hold the key to finding Elena. He was no longer just a man chasing answers. He was a man ready to face whatever darkness awaited him. The car ride was silent, the only sound the hum of the engine as it sped through the city streets. Thomas's thoughts raced. If Elena was there, if Turner and Pierce were involved, what had they done to her? He couldn't even begin to imagine the horrors she might have faced. But he wasn't going to let fear stop him. He was going to bring her home. As the car pulled up to the facility, a sense of finality settled over him. He could feel the tension in his chest, the anticipation of what was to come. This was it, the moment that would define everything. He wasn't sure what he was walking into, but he knew one thing for sure. He was going to find Elena, and nothing was going to stop him. The car came to a stop in front of the private facility, its cold steel gates towering before them like the entrance to some hidden fortress. The guard tower loomed in the distance, casting long shadows across the gravel path. Thomas Beckett's pulse quickened as he stared at the imposing structure. This was it, the place that might hold Elena, the woman he had spent over a year mourning, the woman Maya had claimed was still alive. The windows of the building were dark, and the air was thick with tension. He could feel the weight of every decision that had led him here. There was no turning back now. He stepped out of the car, his coat flapping behind him in the wind, and looked around. The facility was surrounded by a high fence, topped with barbed wire, and the silence that enveloped the place was almost suffocating. James, the assistant who had come along with him, lingered behind, his eyes scanning the area nervously. This place doesn't look right, James muttered under his breath. We don't know what we're walking into, Thomas. But Thomas was already moving forward, his mind set. We have to know. If Elena is here, we'll find her. His voice was low, but there was no mistaking the determination in it. He reached for his phone and dialed the number of the private investigator, wanting to be sure that no stone was left unturned. The phone rang for a few moments before the investigator picked up. Beckett? Are you there? The investigator asked, his voice crackling over the line. I've got eyes on Turner. He's been spotted here, this facility. But there's a catch. I don't know what's really going on inside. I've tried digging deeper, but there's a wall of silence around it. The people involved are too careful, too private. Thomas's grip on the phone tightened. It doesn't matter. I'm going in. I'll find a way. Keep me posted if you get anything else. He ended the call, pocketed the phone, and turned to James. Stay close, he said, his voice steady despite the storm of thoughts that raged within him. We don't know who we're dealing with here. Together, they approached the gates. A guard standing at a small booth watched them with suspicion, his hand resting on the radio at his side. Thomas could feel the guard's eyes on him, but he kept walking, his steps firm and purposeful. As they got closer, the guard stepped forward. You can't just walk in here, the guard said, his voice gruff. Thomas didn't stop. I need to see who's inside. My wife's been here, and I'm not leaving until I find her. The guard's eyes flicked between Thomas and James. There was a moment of silence before he spoke again, his voice softer now. You're going to need more than that to get in. Thomas didn't flinch. I'll make sure I get in, he said, his tone unwavering. The guard hesitated, then reluctantly stepped aside, pressing a button that unlocked the gates. They creaked open slowly, allowing Thomas and James to walk through. Once inside, the facility felt even more oppressive. The concrete walls were cold and stark, and the hallways seemed to stretch on endlessly. The quiet was almost unbearable, broken only by the sound of their footsteps as they moved further into the complex. Thomas felt the eyes of the security cameras following him, their lenses trained on his every move. He wasn't sure if they were just monitoring him or if they had been expecting someone like him, but he wasn't about to let that stop him. He needed answers. As they approached the main building, a figure appeared in the hallway, silhouetted by the dim light. It was a woman, her features hidden by a hood, but there was something about the way she moved that made Thomas pause. The woman stepped forward, and Thomas's heart skipped a beat. There was something familiar about her, something he couldn't quite place. As she got closer, she pulled back the hood, revealing a face that made Thomas's blood run cold. "Elena," he whispered, barely believing what he was seeing. The woman stood before him, her eyes wide with recognition and fear. "Thomas, what are you doing here?" Her voice trembled, but there was no mistaking the relief in her eyes. "I've been trying to find you," Thomas said, his voice thick with emotion. "I've been looking everywhere, trying to find you." Elena shook her head slowly. "You shouldn't have come. It's not safe here." Thomas reached out, his hand shaking as he touched her arm. "It doesn't matter. I'm getting you out of here. Whatever it takes, we're leaving." Elena looked around nervously, as though she feared being watched. "I don't know how much time we have," she said. "There are people here who will stop you, people you don't want to mess with. But you need to get out, now." Thomas's heart raced. "I'm not leaving without you." He glanced back at James, who stood a few feet behind him, watching with wide eyes. "We're going to find a way out. Together." Elena's eyes filled with fear, but there was also a glimmer of hope. For the first time in over a year, Thomas felt like he had a chance to fix everything, to bring her home. The road ahead was uncertain, and danger still loomed, but for the first time, he wasn't walking this path alone. Thomas Beckett's heart was racing as he looked at Elena. The world around him seemed to fade, the walls closing in as he tried to process what was happening. She was standing before him, alive. After everything he had been through, after the grief that had consumed him for over a year, it felt surreal. His wife, the woman he thought he had lost forever, was right in front of him. But the fear in her eyes made it clear that their reunion wasn't going to be as simple as he hoped. "Elena, we need to leave. Right now," Thomas said, his voice firm, but with a sense of urgency he hadn't felt before. Elena shook her head, her gaze darting around the facility. "I can't just walk out of here, Thomas," she whispered, her voice strained. "There are people watching. People who won't let us leave." Thomas's mind spun with the possibilities. Who was she talking about? Who was holding her here and why? "Who's keeping you here, Elena?" he asked, his voice low but filled with desperation. She hesitated, her eyes flicking nervously. "I don't have time to explain everything. I just know that if we don't leave soon, they'll come for us. They'll make sure you never get out of here alive." The words hit Thomas like a punch to the gut. He had never heard Elena speak like this, never imagined that the woman he loved could be caught in something so dangerous. "Who are they, Elena? Tell me. I need to understand." Elena's voice trembled. "They're part of a network, Thomas. People with power. People who think they control everything. And they think they control me." The words were like pieces of a puzzle that he couldn't quite fit together. "A network? What do you mean?" Elena stepped closer, her hands trembling as she took a deep breath. "I don't have much time. They've been watching me since the accident. They kept me hidden, kept me from you, because they needed me for something. They needed me to stay alive, Thomas. They needed to control me." Thomas felt the blood rush to his head as his thoughts swirled. The only thing he could focus on was the fact that Elena had been kept from him, that she had been alive all this time, and yet he had been left in the dark. The pain of those months without her, without knowing, was unbearable. "Why didn't you try to reach out to me?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Elena looked down, her eyes filled with guilt. "I couldn't. I was afraid. I didn't want to drag you into this. They would have hurt you, Thomas. They would have." She stopped herself, her face contorted with the pain of what she was saying. Thomas took her hands in his, steadying her. "We're leaving now. Together. I don't care who they are. I don't care what they've done. We'll get through this. I'll protect you. Elena shook her head slowly, her eyes full of regret. You don't understand, Thomas. They won't let us leave. They'll do everything in their power to stop us. The sound of footsteps echoed down the hallway, and Thomas felt a rush of panic. He couldn't let them take her again. We don't have much time, he said, his voice growing more urgent. We need to go now? We'll figure it out later. Elena's eyes met his, and for the first time since their reunion, she seemed to believe him. She nodded, her resolve hardening. Okay, but we have to be careful. We can't let them know we're leaving. Thomas squeezed her hands and turned to James, who had been standing by the door, his eyes wide with concern. We're getting out of here, Thomas said, his voice firm. Make sure the car is ready. We're not staying another minute. James nodded, not asking questions, just following orders. Thomas turned back to Elena, his heart swelling with a mixture of hope and fear. He had found her, but this was far from over. The fight to get her out of here, to protect her, was just beginning. As they made their way down the hall, Thomas could feel the tension in the air, the weight of the danger that surrounded them. He didn't know what lay ahead, but he knew one thing. Nothing was going to stop him from getting Elena back. Not now. Not ever. Thomas Beckett and Elena moved quickly through the hallways of the private facility, their footsteps echoing in the tense silence. The weight of their escape was heavy in the air, but with every step, Thomas felt a growing sense of urgency. The danger wasn't just around them. It was inside the walls of the very place they were trying to leave. Elena's grip tightened around his hand as they passed each corner, each door that might hide someone watching, someone waiting. James was ahead, checking each room as they moved. The air felt thick, as if the building itself were conspiring against them. We can't go back the way we came, Elena whispered, her voice low but filled with an edge of panic. They'll be expecting us. Thomas nodded, his mind already calculating their next move. We'll find another way out. Stay close. He couldn't let fear take over. Not now. Not when they were so close. He glanced at Elena, the woman he thought he'd lost forever. She was still fragile, still carrying the weight of what she had endured, but in her eyes, Thomas saw a flicker of hope. It was small, but it was there. They reached a small side door at the end of the corridor, one that led outside. It was their only chance. But as Thomas pushed the door open, a sharp voice rang out from behind them. Stop right there. Thomas froze. He didn't turn around, but his hand instinctively went to his pocket, where his phone was, his only line of contact to the outside world. He could feel the weight of the moment, the pressure of everything falling apart. They couldn't afford to be caught. He turned to Elena, his eyes locked with hers. Run, he whispered. Elena hesitated, but Thomas pulled her along with him, and they sprinted through the door, into the cold night air. The chill of the outside world hit them like a wave, but they didn't stop. They ran, and their footsteps filled the empty space around them. Behind them, the sound of the door slamming open echoed, and a shout rang out. They're escaping. Call for backup. The words fueled their fear, but they didn't slow down. They couldn't afford to. The path ahead was dimly lit by a few scattered streetlights, and the shadows seemed to close in around them. Thomas's breath came in quick bursts as he pushed forward, pulling Elena with him, not daring to look back. He could feel the coldness of the night creeping into his bones, but he refused to stop. He couldn't stop, not when they were this close. Elena was still beside him, her breath ragged, but her steps strong. The road ahead was unknown, but they were out of the facility now, out of their prison. As they reached the edge of the property, Thomas heard the sound of cars approaching. Their window was closing fast. He grabbed Elena's hand, pulling her into an alleyway, their only hope of hiding. The alley was narrow, cluttered with trash and debris, but it would have to do. Thomas pressed his back against the wall, listening to the cars pass by. His heart raced as the headlights swept across the street. They were searching for them, but they had to be smart. They couldn't let the searchers find them now. He could feel Elena's hand shaking in his, but when he looked at her, he saw that she was focused, determined. They couldn't go back. They couldn't stay in one place. But for the first time in what felt like forever, Thomas felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. He had found Elena, and they had a chance, no matter how slim, to escape this nightmare. They just had to keep moving. We'll get through this, Thomas whispered, his voice steady even though his body was taut with tension. Elena nodded, her eyes scanning the street. We will. They waited, hidden in the shadows, listening for the sounds of their pursuers. The world around them was dark and uncertain, but they were together. And that was all that mattered. They had a chance now. They just had to hold on to it.